as a venture studio, you might be doing the work in a different way than the larger organization. But if you can do it in a different way and leverage the assets of that larger organization, I think that's how you're going to create the sort of unfair competitive advantage.
Techsauce Global, sparking innovative thoughts. Well, you might know him from the past gatherings or events of Techsauce Global Summit. Today, we're going to talk to someone who's definitely in the field of building up businesses or supporting ecosystems, especially here in Asia. You are, of course, with me, Chaowarat, Yongjiranon, or Peng, on our special podcast of Techsauce Global Podcast, where we talk about innovation and inspirational ideas that might help you today as you're listening to us. Okay, so today we are with Mikepeng, the Chief Creative Officer of Moon Creative Lab. 2 years prior, he was the partner of IDEO Global and a managing director and co-founder of IDEO Tokyo. And he's talking to us right from Japan, right? Swadika, hello.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. Good to be here.
Yes, thank you for talking to us today. First off, it's been a rough 2 years since we've actually talked to you and interviewed you. Can you tell us a little bit about your work so far and what you've been up to?
Sure. First off, thank you so much for having me. It's so great to be able to talk to you, hopefully in person next time, but until now on the digital channels. But yes, as you mentioned, prior to joining Moon, I was working at IDEO, and I think many people might know of IDEO as a design innovation consulting firm, helping other companies design new products, new services, new businesses. And so that's always been something I've been really passionate about. During my latter years at IDEO Tokyo, I met Moon Creative Lab. So Moon Creative Lab is a venture studio that powers the new businesses for Mitsui & Co. And so for those of you that don't know, Mitsui & Co. is what we call a Sogo Shosha. So it's a large Japanese trading and investment firm, so one of the largest in Japan. And Sogo Shoshas, they're known, they do everything from ramen to rockets. So it's a very diversified portfolio of businesses. And they're traders and investors. And what that means is they do a lot of connecting. They do a lot of partnerships. They do a lot of joint ventures. And so they came to IDEO because they were interested in creating, a new entity that would specialize in the creation of new businesses, new startups. And the reason for that is the corporate planning and strategy team was looking at the 2030 long-term management vision plan. And when they were looking at the plan, they thought, hey, you know what, we're really good at connecting with other partners and other businesses, but we think that the future is not just about connecting, but we also need to be able to create. We have to create businesses from scratch. And we know that the creation of new businesses is very different than just the connecting of businesses. And that requires new skill sets, new mindsets, and requires creativity and innovation. So in order to get the company going in that direction, we know we need to build a little entity inside of Mitsui that can really specialize in that and help us, create new businesses. And so that's where it all began. And so Moon has been around since 2018. So the majority of Moon's years have been during the pandemic, which has been a little bit difficult.
Interesting.
But that being said, it's been really interesting trying to build a new business. Moon is actually a new business as well throughout the pandemic. And so over the last 3+ years, we've been trying to build new businesses. And so there's a few different ways businesses can form within Moon. So Mitsui has 45,000 people around the world, right? And so any one of the 45,000 people may have a really good idea on a new business to start. They can submit it and they can pitch it. And if we, Moon, think that there's some potential, we bring them in and we surround them with designers, engineers, product folks to help them build that venture. Or a business unit within Mitsui. So Mitsui has 16 different business units. But if a business unit has, part of their long-term strategy has this interesting idea and they need help kind of creating that and launching it, they can also come to Moon and we can work with that business unit to bring that idea to life. So yeah, that's what I've been up to for the last few years.
That's a lot, especially when you're talking about during pandemic times as well. And as I said, it's interesting because it's not like a regular thing that you would see like pre-pandemic, right? Now we're like seeing what has happened in the past 2 years, and we're kind of like luckily, in a post-pandemic stages. So it's very interesting as to seeing your insight as to how things have changed. So then would you say then the type of organization that is best suited to build a venture building or builder, has it changed? Well, first off, let's define what kind of organization would be best suited to create a venture builder first then.
Yeah, I think so. So we're interesting. I know there's many terms for what we do. I think venture builder is a good one. A lot of people also, you'll hear the word venture studio quite often as well. And what's interesting is we're a corporate venture studio, right? Because Mitsui is this large organization, and within Mitsui's large ecosystem, we are helping Mitsui build new ventures. And so, to me, if I think about that category, there's a few things that organizations need to, or are best suited for this type of work. I think, as I mentioned before, this needs to be part of a bigger strategy for the organization. Venture building, any type of venture studio, venture building, these are not quick wins. These take time, and especially within a very corporate type of organization, it takes even longer, right? We're not pulling the young hackers from around the world. We're talking about, business folks, who have been in the organization for tens of years, who have maybe new ideas, but, have never done that before, have never started that idea or never built that business before. So I think these are organizations that need to really have, who are really looking towards the future. And then these are organizations that are also willing to be patient, as I mentioned. But I think more importantly, organizations that are best suited for this need to embrace a culture of experimentation. They need to be really open and flexible to things that will work, but also things that don't work. And as opposed to penalizing or reprimanding the things that don't work, these need to be organizations that will take that as learnings, as fuel to then bring it back into the system and use it to like double down on what's next. And so it requires really that sort of that culture of experimentation, the culture to celebrate failures, and that growth mindset in order to actually to successfully be part of the organization. So that's just a few things. I think venture studios, venture builders. And we'll talk about the definition, I think, going forward, but I think it's a lot around time and talent. So these take a little bit longer than maybe your so-called incubator or accelerator. And we want to surround each idea with amazing talent, right? And so we have designers, engineers, product folks, and then we have HR, operations, marketing that help aid that venture as well. And so in order to do that, you need to make sure you're building an organization that can attract that talent, and then you apply that talent to each of the different ideas.
Is it important as well that you have a clear goal as to because that's often one of the biggest mistakes that companies do. Then, okay, you teased a little bit about that, about the definitions, and definitely, I think perhaps maybe we'll try to clarify that too in our podcast today, because I'm sure for those who are new to this, they should already have heard about venture building and stuff, but for those who are still new, we don't let's just be equal to everyone. Everyone should have the equal chances to understand these concepts, which are changing and evolving every day. So let's clarify, what is the difference between venture building, or you say, venture studios, and as you just mentioned, they're accelerators?
Yeah, I think it's a lot based on the stage, and then the type of support that an accelerator and or a venture studio provides. And so if I think about the traditional sense of an accelerator, the idea is already defined. You already have that sort of that person who has the idea, who started the idea, maybe already has an MVP, and they're coming to an accelerator because they're looking for accelerated growth, right? So they already have the idea. they've already probably prototyped it a bunch, and now they're coming to the accelerator to look for capital, look for networks, look for support services to get to the next stage. And it's for a limited amount of time. So I think accelerators often come in batches. So there's like a batch of organizations that are all coming into the accelerator at the same time. Again, not all accelerators are the same, but it's very programmatic. It's very program based. And so as soon as these new startups come in, it's within 3 to 6 months. How far can we accelerate that particular venture? Venture studios, I think, are much earlier in the process. So and also they take it way past, I think, where, not way past, but I think also where accelerators end up. So think of a venture studio, venture builder as being much more holistic. So because where the idea comes from may not have even started yet when you come to a venture studio. So in our case at Mitsui, we are just spending just as much time refining an initial idea with someone who has the idea. And then once that idea comes into Moon, we're then supporting it, growing it. And then hopefully we get to a point where we can then, more radically grow it, accelerate it, give it marketing support, give all the different types of support to launch into a new co. So I see venture studio as being, a longer part of the journey. So all the way from idea conception to potentially a potential exit of whatever kind, versus accelerators, you usually have skipped that initial step. You've already have an idea, you already have a pretty good sense of the business, and they come into the accelerator really for an accelerated period of time of growth and then can exit accordingly. And so that's where, different types of companies will join, different types of organizations. But for Mitsui, why it makes sense to create a venture studio is that we're not working with the hotshot engineer who can really hack their way through the system, right? We're talking about people who have been at Mitsui for 10 years, 20 years, who've just been, business investors and traders. They may not know exactly what it takes to launch a business. And so when a venture studio really makes sense, because we are going to surround them and guide them through this entire process from the idea conception all the way to a potential exit.
For those who are, organizations or companies that are figuring between these two types of support programs, what would you say to them? I mean, what's your advice in terms of deciding between the two? I mean, obviously there's pros and cons, right?
Yes. I think those organizations that have naturally built in a culture of, brainstorming, prototyping, launching new businesses. I would say a lot more tech companies, tech-oriented companies, may choose an incubator accelerator model, right? Because they're innately in being involved in technology. They're able to move quite quickly. They're used to moving quite quickly. They're used to, let's say, agile development. And so, when choosing a program, they can choose one where they can, they're going to really get all the utilization out of an accelerator or incubator to succeed. I think for organizations like a Mitsui, that's much more traditional business, right? And so yes, technology is now a big part of the organization. There's a lot of digital transformation, but Mitsui's bread and butter is a lot of raw materials. It's very, I would say old school business. In these cases, I say a venture studio makes a bit more sense because the people that you have within the organization may not know exactly what it takes to have those entrepreneurial skill sets, mindsets to build a business. And in those cases, things take a little bit longer. They need to be guided more through the process. There's a lot more different types of support that we could offer as part of a venture studio. So it's not purely time-based, but if you give it a little bit longer, you can, there's a lot of learning that people go through, and they learn just as much about what it takes to build and engineer a product, in addition to providing them the resources that will be able to do that. So I would say organizations that I would say have I don't want to say a bit more conservative, but like are a bit more old school in that sense, I think could really benefit from a venture studio model, because it just gives them a little bit more room to play with and bring their organization along with it. More time, more resources. So that I think is one of the downsides, or I think the cons, which is it is a bit more time and resource strained, right, than I would say an accelerator. And so that's why I think it also requires an organization who's really committed to seeing this through for a little bit of time, because it's going to take longer, it's going to require more resources. But if you're able to be patient and if you can kind of refine the model, I think, it gives it a bit more, a bit more breathing room to actually succeed.
So what are the key, I mean, we've teased a little bit about the, what type of organization, being conservative, being committed. What are the key success factors that, from your experience, that you've seen that have been kind of universal in making sure that venture builders or venture studios are a success?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is for all venture builders and venture studios, but I can speak specifically for Mitsui and Moon Creative Lab, where you really, I think you brought this up earlier, you really need to define what success is. And there's not just one type of success. Success comes in many different shapes and sizes. So even in the, as Moon, even if we have a portfolio of, let's say, 15 or 20 ventures or projects, success for each of them may look a little bit different because they're not of the same industry. Each person is built a bit differently. The teams are a bit different. So I think we need to really, as a venture studio, you really have to define what does success look like, and to make sure that it's not one note, because you're going to see many different types of organizations come through that are built differently, that are in a different industry, that may move more quickly, but more slowly, that are more resource intensive, that are more resource light. Like, there's so many different combinations of factors that sort of define success. So I'd say one of the success factors is to actually define what success is. The second one, I alluded to this, is I think you need a portfolio of ventures. So meaning, like, not everything is going to be, within 1 year, it's going to be $1 million company. I think you need some that maybe you can see some shorter term wins, but others that maybe require some development that you won't see anything until another couple years. And I think the variety of the variety within the portfolio, I think, is really important for a venture studio as well. Because Moon is a corporate venture studio, that also means that I think every venture studio that's part of a larger organization should always look at how to utilize the assets of that larger organization. That is how you're going to get, competitive advantage, right? And so don't build a venture studio to try and do everything opposite from what the larger organization is doing. What you need to do is you need to really understand the larger organization, all the assets they have, all the partnerships they have, and see where you can really take advantage of them, as opposed to go the other way. And so I think this is a very interesting tension, because as a venture studio, you might be doing the work in a different way than the larger organization. But if you can do it in a different way and leverage the assets of that larger organization, I think that's how you're going to create the sort of unfair competitive advantage.
Is that a challenge? Like, do you think that often people kind of stray from the fact, of like, we really need to start something new, so let's just start something new without really thinking about what they have at the same time and leveraging that? Absolutely.
I think there's a lot of, and call it what you want, not all of them are venture studios, but there's a lot of, innovation hubs that are located, that large organizations have. And any time where I feel like that innovation center, whether it's a venture studio, whether it's a hub, whatever you want to call it, strays too far from the mother organization, and it usually is doomed for failure. But being too close is also not right either, because you're just then going to adopt the mothership's kind of way of thinking, and the politics and bureaucracy is going to prevent you from also doing things a bit differently. So I think always holding the tension. I think tension is a good thing, not a bad thing. So I think holding the tension of how close, how far you are away from mothership, how much you utilize the larger organization in terms of assets, but how much you want to, create your own way forward. I think always holding that tension is going to be one of the key success factors for a lot of venture studios. And it's an art, because it requires, I think those that think they can avoid the large mother organization by doing this really cool, agile, we're so creative, we're so different, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, because I think, the organization is successful for a reason, right? And if you ignore it too much, or if you keep pushing it away, you just won't get the buy-in and you won't get the support that you need. And so it's about constantly, it's an ebb and flow of informing them enough of what we're doing and what to get excited about, but also protecting a good portion of it so that you can actually move a little bit faster than the mother organization. I think that tension is always really key.
What would you say would be some of the lessons you've learned over the past? I mean, of course, nothing is perfect. As you said, there's always tension, there's always challenges to overcome. What are some things that we can learn from what you've experienced?
Yeah, this is my favorite thing. This is my mantra. I kind of hold, not only do I tell folks within our organization, but it's just something I really believe in, which is small times many equals big. Small times many equals big. And I say that because everyone is looking for the unicorn. Everyone wants that big, that Airbnb, the thing that's going to be like, oh my God, this is so disruptive. And it's, it's going to be one of the biggest organizations out there. But it just, I think, yeah, good on you if you can do that. But that, I think for something like a venture studio, actually little successes along the way, those multiplied together can actually create a big win, right? And I think it might be less sexy, but I think when you're trying to build something new, that idea of actually, are we moving forward? Does the organization have a compass? This is the difference between a compass and a map, right? We don't have a map, we have a compass to make sure we're just heading in the right direction. And as long as we're heading in the right direction and there's small wins along the way and we can talk about those small wins, I think that's huge. Because that's where you're gonna start building up momentum, and then you'll get some bigger wins, right? But if you're looking, and I think this is the failure of a lot of sort of new innovation hubs and venture studios, which is if you're looking for that big win in like a year or 2 years after you start, it's just going to be really difficult, and you're going to have all this pressure, and it's just you're going to make decisions solely based on money. And I think all of us know that money is only one piece of the equation, right? And so I think that's why I hold this mantra, small times many equals big, very close to my heart. Another sort of lesson learned is, especially in the beginning of anything you create, but especially like a venture studio, you're not going to get monetary returns, really quickly, right? And thus you need what I call a lot of soft power, and you need to communicate that soft power. And that soft power to me is in stories, right? And so for us at Moon, we have two big missions. One is to launch successful new businesses, but the other is to start transforming the people within Mitsui, teaching them new skills and new mindsets. And so if you can, if the creation of new businesses, it's going to take a little bit longer to actually see successes, the more stories you can tell of these small wins and how people have transformed, and where that project was a year ago and where they are now, how many more users they were able to get, how much more viral their idea is. If you can use this soft power to help communicate with not only within the larger organization, but more globally, I think that can buy you more time to actually then hit some of these, what I call more the big power, right? Which is like the money, the monetary returns and things you're seeing. So I think don't underestimate the soft power. In fact, I think really leverage the soft power in your favor. And then the third, I mentioned this before, but you should obviously showcase your successes, but you have to celebrate your failures. You're not going to get everything right, and to ignore them and to pretend they never happened and to feel embarrassed by them is counter to the culture that you're trying to create. And so by celebrating failures, you're saying failures is okay and it's completely part of this process. And let's really use those quote unquote failures as the learning fuel to get us to the next step. Because the more we fail, the more we learn and the better we're going to get. And so I think that idea, I think, is really critical too. And so those companies that are able to do that, I think will have a much better chance of success.
I'm totally like sparks are flying. Definitely, like you shouldn't be comparing yourself to others, and it's a really hard thing. It's like human nature, isn't it? Everybody thinks that if they follow, they have to be like Silicon Valley. They have to like to have a play by the book. But that's the whole point, isn't it? Of the disruption that we've been facing. That is like it's not ABC. It depends on your ecosystem. It depends on your company and your corporations and everything. I have a little follow-up question. Like, how do you then, you say, you have to have soft power. That's a good thing. You also have to understand that it's not just about money, but then how do you at the same time satisfy or assure the corporation side of your progress?
Yeah, I mean, this doesn't mean, this criteria doesn't include any sort of quantitative measurements, right? I think quantitative measurements are really important. I think the key is to show traction, right? And traction can come in many different, flavors. Traction doesn't always have to come. I mean, of course, traction, you would love to see traction in terms of the typical, 3-letter acronym, right? MAU, DAU, all these like monthly active users, daily active users. You want to see these like grow, and ideally more exponentially. But I think as long as there is a measurement in place that shows that this project, this venture is progressing, in the forward motion, I think that's really key. And so we have this thing at Moon that's our version of what we call North Star metric. So every single project has one measurement that they have defined as the one key measurement that will show that things are progressing forward. And everyone gets to determine that in the beginning of the year. And of course that can change, but that's the only one measurement quantitatively that we want to continuously follow and that will continuously track. And just because you don't hit it doesn't mean it's bad, but it offers a conversation starter, right, for the committee and the board that decides, what comes next. And so I think, showing traction, showing progress is really key. But we also know that in the beginning stage, it's not black and white. Like it's not just that you hit to this number and you're going to be successful. There's so many other factors. And so what we want to make sure is there's some way to quantitatively compare on a regular cadence, but that we surround that with other stories, other things that give us the sense that this is something that's worth continually investing in.
An interesting aspect, as I mentioned before, and I saved it to now, in terms of the evolution of venture studios and venture builders in the past years, especially with your experience during the pandemic, creating something, or making that new, with new things with Moon Creative Lab. How do you think, or how have you seen the evolution of venture builders or studios, especially with the pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because my sense is venture builders, venture studios are itself an evolution of accelerators and incubators, right? Like, so, accelerators and incubators each play its own role. Someone realized that there's a gap somewhere, in the market, which is like, there's no one that's helping, take it from all the way from beginning, from A to Z. Can we create an organization like that can help build the venture from beginning to end? And so if venture studios are already an evolution of some of the things we've seen in the world, I think the next thing is to say, okay, what's the evolution of venture studios themselves? And I think that's really exciting. Like, I think we're constantly taking hints from everything that's out there in the world. But I think what's interesting is I find the space of corporate venture studios to be particularly exciting in the sense that, we're not, at least currently in how the organization is set up for as Moon Creative Lab, we're utilizing the talent that sits within this really big behemoth organization. And our hypothesis is that you have amazing people with creative potential. There must be amazing ideas from people on the ground. Let's find them, let's bring it together, let's nurture it, and then I think we can create something new from it, right? I think a lot of big corporations are much more in that sort of, okay, let's just go buy a company that can do that, right? Let's go buy, a new company that, we see a lot of momentum, let's go buy them, let's acquire them, let's joint venture with them. And to me, what's interesting is, no, I do believe that, there's so much talent in-house. We just have to find a way to unlock it. And so that's where I like to call it the third space, right? So, which is like, you have incubators, you have accelerators, and you have this like big company with a small company within this big company, the corporate venture studio model. And I think there's something cool there. I think it's maybe not as sexy as I mentioned, as some of the other organizations that are out there, but I think it can be very transformative. And what I've learned, this is during my time at IDEA, working with so many different large companies in many different types of industries, which is, large organizations, maybe they're successful for a reason, and they may have become conservative for a reason. But if you can find a way to unlock them and push them forward, especially in a place like Japan, other Japanese organizations are going to follow. And then you're moving a whole country towards a direction, right? And so that's been my always hope, which is if we can figure out how Moon Creative Lab can be successful for Mitsui, and Mitsui becomes, a really successful large organization that also is innovative and creative, you better believe that all these other large Japanese corporations are going to be like, oh, I want something like that too. And then if you keep moving all that direction, like I'm excited for what society has in store, right? Where the intersection of business, like large business, entrepreneurial startups, where that all comes together. I think that's really, really exciting. And so I don't know, that's a long way, not really answering the question, but I do think there's something in the space where let's not just ditch these old traditional businesses. Let's actually celebrate them, and let's find the talent within them. And if you give it a bit of a spark from external folks, like myself, who have worked with many different types of organizations, and you blend that in with this, large company, what successes can come out of that. I think it's kind of exciting to think about.
No, it is, and it's a reflection of Asia as well. I mean, Southeast Asia, Thailand, there's such big corporate power here. And from my observation of the ecosystem or the environment in Japan, I mean, if you could do that in Japan, that's a really good reflection of what is the possibility for others in Asia to follow. So then, what is you say that you talked about the potential, but then do you have any final advice for those who are listening who are still probably working within organizations or have to deal with organizations? How can we move forward in a very wise way, in a way that's is innovative, but at the same time, as you said, leveraging what has already been built over the years?
I think you actually mentioned this earlier, which I really subscribe to. And this is going to be a little bit ironic, but as someone who lives in the Bay Area, in Silicon Valley, but don't just look at the Silicon Valley model. It is not the only model out there. And we're still not sure if it's the right successful model, right? Like, I think what's interesting is bringing the best of East meets West. And that does not mean just taking everything from the West and importing it to the East. I actually think the special sauce is taking so much of Asia. Asia is not one country. Asia is many different countries, but there's similar value systems, there's similar cultural aspects. And, I think many times, a lot of folks have said, oh, that it goes against the sort of startup and innovation. Sure, maybe in the traditional sense, but I think the future is about how do you take all the goodness that exists in Asia and move it forward in a new way. And that new way is not a pure Silicon Valley model way. I think it's about taking some hints from there for sure, but also really leveraging what Asia is really, really good at, right? And pushing that forward as well. I don't know exactly what those are. I think that's something that we're really excited to figure out as well. But if I look at Japan and what's so amazing and special about Japan, you look at the culture and you look at tradition and you look at quality, right? And you look at the pursuit of perfection. Many of these are in tension with things that happen, let's say, in the US, right? Which is like, it needs to be fast, it needs to be quick, it needs to be agile, it needs to, it's also be new, right? And so I think there's the ability to take some of these, cultural inspiration from Asia, and then like really figuring out how to leverage those aspects in this new way. So that to me is like what my advice for Asia is: don't ever ditch the things that really make Asia special, right? And that's specific to each country. In fact, it should be the opposite. It's about looking at what Asia is really strong at and seeing if there's just a twist on that, a slight twist on that can push us forward. And I think that would be really exciting, because I'm a firm believer that a lot of the future of society in general is going to come from Asia. There's so much Asia has to offer. And so my belief is, it's not about ditching this to become more Western. It's about trying to find these beautiful combinations that can take it forward.
Thank you so much for sharing, your insight on your work so far. And it's in very insightful and very inspirational, very energizing to see that you're working in a field where definitely we're going to see a change in how things are done in terms of creating new business and also building on top of old business. To wrap up things here on our podcast talk, I want to give you the opportunity to say anything that we haven't said so far. Last words, last takeaway for our listeners.
If I think about what really motivates me and what gets me really excited, it's always the intersection of things. It's never one thing alone. And so I mentioned the sort of this like East meets West intersection, right? Which I think is really key. But I also think creative thinking and rational business thinking, right? One is not better than the other, but the intersection is what's really, really exciting. And so I think one thing that I keep close to me is that, the world is complicated. It's never one or the other. It's always a little bit of everything. And so I think it's about finding the interesting intersections is where I think the future is going to be. And so don't ever be forced to choose one or the other. I think actually it's the taking of the best of both worlds or multiple worlds that's really going to be the key to success.
Thank you so much for those words, and I'm sure we're going to see more from you, hopefully face to face here in Thailand. But in the meantime, we wish you well. Thank you so much, Mike, for being with us here on our podcast. ขอบคุณค่ะ.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, and this has been yet another episode of Techsauce Global Podcast. Tune in for more on our website and our podcast list. So stay tuned for that. For now, bye-bye. สวัสดีค่ะ.
Techsauce, sparking innovative thoughts.